All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, Johnson Chukwu, the Chief Executive Officer at Cowry Asset Management, is joining me right now from Lagos. Mr. Chukwu, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me. Good morning.
Okay,
welcome to the new month.
Oh, okay, yes. Happy New Month, because in Nigeria we celebrate everything. Happy New Month, Happy Christmas, Happy Eid, Happy New Week, Happy New Day. So happy everything. All right, let's get started. The president, 5 years in office, just a few days ago, I think 2-3 days ago. What's your take? I did realize that it could be my own personal, what I noticed. It seems that people were not even talking about, people did not even know that President Buhari is already 5 years in office. It seems, some other issues took that. What do you think? Because we've seen a whole lot of things happening in the country. People, what I could gauge even on social media, a lot of people are not happy. Things are happening. Young girls are getting raped, killed, and all of that. It was a really traumatic one for me over this weekend, So what's your own view?
Well, Nancy, just like you rightly pointed out, what has happened is that the COVID-19 pandemic has actually dwarfed virtually everything in the economy, in the system, or in the country. And but for the case of the lady that was raped in University of Benin and such other very negative cases, you will observe that a lot of the negative things happening in the country have been dwarfed by COVID-19, because it looks like everybody's attention is focused on that. And then we are not even reading stories of people being killed in Zamfara State or in Katsina State or any other part of the country. And similarly, the emphasis that should have been placed on the first year of the new government for the state government that we inaugurated last year, May 29th, or the 5 years of those who have been in government for the past 5 years, including the president, have all taken the back door because most people have been focused on this COVID-19. And that's why you realize that few analysis were done on the 5 years of President Buhari's government or any of the state governments, because our attention has actually been focused on the pandemic. I think somehow they have escaped critical assessment in the past 1 year of governance.
Okay, what's your own assessment of President Buhari's 5 years? Let's take it from 5 years first. Then we'll come back to the last 1 year. You understand what I want to do? Because earlier on, I did, give our views, some analysis of what the administration has done in the last 5 years. They did put that together. In fact, that was sent to me and all of that. I intend to have perhaps one of them to critique this administration and to critique some of those things that I've gotten. But what's your own assessment in the last 5 years?
Nancy, I have to stay on my area of core competence. And
economy,
for me to assess the government, yes, I will focus on the economy. Yeah. And I will take us through the 5 years of government. In 2015, when the president came into power, the GDP grew at a rate of 2.79%. In 2016, the GDP contracted by 1.58%. In 2017, the GDP grew by 0.82%. In 2018, it grew by 1.91%. In 2019, we had a GDP growth of 2.27%. And the first quarter of this year, we grew by 1.87%. So in effect, our GDP growth rate has averaged less than 2% in the past 5 years. If we juxtapose that against our population growth rate of about 3%, you can understand why the incidence of poverty is increasing, why even the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics is saying that our level of poverty is, we are approaching about, of course, poverty was said that level of poverty is about, we have about 98 million people that are in poverty, abject poverty. So if you look at the economic parameters, the scorecard is not looking very pleasant. There may be other areas where I'm not knowledgeable in, maybe political sagacity, that the president has done excellently well. I'm not in a position to discuss that. But if you look at what you use to measure economic performance in any country, which is the GDP growth rate and the poverty index, then, like I said, the report card is not looking very pleasant. But that is not a total assessment of the president's performance. Like I said, I will only dwell on areas of my core competence. And those who are schooled in political matters can discuss what the president has done in the political space.
If you want to give the president a score regarding the way he's handled the economy and economic expectations, economic outcomes in the last 5 years, what would that score be of 100?
Nancy, why are you boxing me to give a score? I've already given you the basic figures. I mean,
you know in economy or in finance, there's always ranking. For example, doing business ranking for Nigeria, we are, I think, 131, is it not? So there's always a ranking. So give Mr. President a rank. So he's watching, his people are watching, his economic handlers are watching, so that they will know if they did well in the last 5 years or not.
Okay, Nancy, there's no metrics to give a ranking on which you can say, okay, if you scored 2% GDP growth rate, you will score this in the ranking grid. But the fact is that, like I said earlier, the economic scorecard is not looking very pleasant. The president may not have done very well when you assess him solely on economic performance. But unfortunately, or fortunately, not even unfortunately, fortunately, you're not going to assess him only on one parameter. But on economic factors, the country has not done well in the past 5 years. Of course, we all knew, had been issue that the president's strength as a person was on economic issues. I mean, what people were expecting that the president would come and put to rest the level of insecurity we have in the country. I think that's one of the strongest strengths he was supposed to come with: ability to fight corruption and ability to fight insecurity in the country. If you recall, the major campaign, the people who voted for him, the campaigns in 2015 was underpinned by the hope that the president will fight a very successful way against insurgency in the Northeast and the insecurity in other parts of the country, and so that the president will fight corruption to a standstill. So maybe when those who are knowledgeable in that, more knowledgeable in that area to assess him, maybe they will give us his score in those areas. But if you look at an average man on the street, I also think there are still a lot of areas to be covered in the fight against corruption and as well as in the fight against insurgency and insecurity in the country. You just mentioned that you do not be happy over the weekend due to increasing cases of rape, particularly the very painful and disheartening case of a young girl who was raped to death in University of Benin premises, in the church building and understood, which for me was a sacrilege. So I think the president has a lot of work to do in the remaining 3 years of his government, so that at the end of the day, we will all be happy and smiling with him and say, look, Mr. President, you have done very well in all the facets of managing the leader's public life.
For the president, have there been more wins than downsides for him economically, or have there been more downsides than more upsides for him economically? Because I think it was Jesse Jackson, yes, Jesse Jackson of the years, that said that one is not indeed free unless you have economic freedom. You know, so in Nigeria, would we also say that we have economic freedom as it is right now? So if you take a look at President Buhari's handling of the economy in the last 5 years, have there been more wins than losses, or have there been more losses than gains?
Okay, if you have to reduce it to that level, of course, the GDP has been growing. So if you look at that as the basis to say, are we in the positive side? Then yes, we're on the positive side, because we are not seeing a consistent contraction. We're not in a depression. We've seen a short recession in 2016. But beyond that, one of the things you should be measuring are what's our level of poverty, what's the level of unemployment. These are factors that you have to look at. Have we grown our external reserve, or have we improved on our exchange rate? So are we improving the standard of living of the citizens? These are factors that you and I will have to be asking. But the reality, like I said, is that you don't assess a president based only on one factor. On the economic front, I have been very emphatic that the report card is not looking very, very pleasant. On other factors, maybe the president has done well, but to reduce it to whether we've actually made progress. In some areas, if you want to look at it in some areas, take for the agricultural sector. There's been some improvement in the agricultural sector. There's been some level of redefinition of value system in the agricultural sector. We've seen situations where we're shifting away from the importation of rice. Not that we have fully shifted away from importation of rice, because we still have a lot of foreign rice in the country. But there's a lot of improvement in terms of rice production in the country. And then that's one of the major staples of the country. So you can see on agricultural front, in respect of that agricultural sector is not growing as fast as we think it should be growing. Because if you look at the first quarter GDP figure, agri grew up by only 2.2%. But in terms of agricultural value chain, we've seen an improvement. We've seen the setting up of modern rice milling factories across the country. Today, you can actually have rice that is grown and processed in the country that are fully destoned, parboiled, and properly packaged. So on that front, you could say at agricultural space, the president is doing something. There's been a lot of growth in the telecommunications sector. And despite some hiccups in terms of regulatory challenges, we've seen the telecommunications sector currently accounting for about 14.07% of the GDP and grew at an average of 7.6% in the first quarter of this year. So you can say on that area, in that sector, there's been improvements. There are some other sectors that have recorded some level of improvement, some level of expansion, when you want to disaggregate the entire economy based on sectorial performance. But like I said, when you now put the whole thing together into a single box and you look at the GDP performance, it's not been very strong.
Okay. Mr. Chukwu, let's just quickly take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue to scrutinize President Buhari's 5 years in office. I think when we come back, the next question will be assessed the last 1 year. We've done for 5 years, but the last 1 year, which is also, marred with the coronavirus pandemic. But let's quickly take a break. Don't forget, those of you watching us, you can join us on all our social media platforms. You can also reach us, official AIT Live. That is the official AIT handle on Twitter and all other social media handles. We'll be right back after this break. Do join us again. All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, we're still on with our conversation. Johnson Chukwu, the Chief Executive Officer at Cowry Asset Management, is still with me. He's speaking to me via Skype from Lagos, the Commercial Nerve Center. Mr. Chukwu, analyze for me President Buhari's scorecard in the last 1 year, the new dispensation in the last 1 year.
Okay, Nancy, in analyzing the last 1 year, you have to also recognize some of the challenges that the government has to deal with in the last 1 year. In the first place, the second half of last year was still dominated or overtaken by political activities. You remember the president was inaugurated on May 29, 2019. Then there was a time to set up a new government, appoint the ministers, and the ministers to be sworn in and take office. So you realize that what happens in every election year is that the second half of the year is actually spent setting up a new government, which is what happened last year. Then the first half of this year, which completed the first 1 year of the government, unfortunately for the government, has also been dominated by health crisis, global health crisis. Of course, we know the first index case of COVID-19 came into Nigeria in February. And prior to that, the global economy was already suffering from supply chain contraction as a result of the crisis in Wuhan in China from December last year. So you realize that this year may be a difficult year to appropriately or to assess any civilian government in any country between May 29th, 2019 and May 29, 2020. So I actually sympathize with the governments at different levels. We've seen a collapse of government revenue as a result of the pandemic, which had direct impact on the crude price. Of course, we're seeing some recovery, hopefully. So if you want to look at general terms, and you have to look at what are those estimative factors that may have affected performance in the first year of this current dispensation. And I think there are so too many of them. Most importantly, this pandemic. But one did not expect so much in the second half of last year because, like I said earlier, every election year, the second half of the year is dominated by the process of setting up a government, which is exactly what happened last year. So I think for us to now assess what the president will do in his second term, we need to start judging him from what happens in the next 2 years of his government, because the last year of the government will also be dominated by political activities.
That means our structure, the first year, political activities, choosing of ministers, technically whosoever comes in or whatsoever administration is on has like 2 years to work, because the first year is marred by political activities, choosing of ministers. The last year is also preparation for the next election. So I don't know how much development we'll put in that, but that's perhaps for the political people to analyze, you know. But let's move over to another issue, because I'll still be analyzing this in days, because just like you said, 5 years of President Buhari is not what I can take in the next 20 or 1 hour show. I think I have to do a series on it. Anyway, moving ahead, let's take a look at the MPC meeting that was held just a few days ago. A surprise move. I spoke to a few analysts. I didn't speak to you last week, so I didn't know what your prediction or your forecast was concerning MPR rate, liquidity ratio, and cash reserve requirement. But the MPC did surprise most of us by dropping benchmark interest rate. I'll come to you in a bit for your answer. For those that are watching us and you didn't get to see that clip last week, the MPC's decisions, that it was telecast. The telecast was live on AIT last week. Let's just take it in case you didn't see it, so that you get to hear Godwin Emefiele say what the decisions are. We'll come back to Mr. Chukwu after that.
After reviewing the three options, the MPC noted that the imperative for monetary policy at the May 2020 meeting was to strike a balance between supporting the recovery of output growth while maintaining stable price development across inflation, the exchange rate, and market interest rates. To this end, committee noted that the cash reserve ratio requirement was recently adjusted upwards as a means of tightening the stance of policy. In its response to COVID-19 pandemic, however, the bank reduced interest rates associated with all CBN interventions from 9 to 5%. Increasing MPR at this stage will thus be counterintuitive and will result in upward pressure on retail market rates. Committee maintained that although a sharp decline in output growth is expected in the second quarter of 2020 and maybe the third quarter, if the current stimulus initiatives are properly implemented, the economy would reverse to positive growth by the fourth quarter. Hence, the optimism on the part of the Monetary Policy Committee that the country may not slide into recession. In view of the foregoing, the committee decided by a unanimous vote to reduce monetary policy rate and to hold all other policy parameters constant.
All right, that was Godwin Emefiele, the central bank governor, reading out the decisions of the MPC meeting after the one-day meeting last week. 12.5% for the MPR at the monetary policy rates, cash reserve requirements at 27.5%, liquidity ratio left unchanged at 30%. Mr. Chukwu, speak to my viewers why these rates are important, why we watch this rate, why there's an MPC meeting, you know, May, we had in January, March, May, the next one will be in July, September, then November, 6 times in a year. Why are these rates important? What are those rates? What do they mean?
Okay, let me start from the general statement. The MPC, the parameters or the key rates that MPC review every 2 months are important because they determine the level of liquidity in the economy. They determine the rate of lending in the economy as well as the deposit rates in the economy. They also influence the rate at which the economy can grow or also can be used to slow down the economy in the case of hypergrowth and inflation. They are parameters that influence the rate of inflation in the country, or they are used to manage the rate of inflation in the country. Those are the reasons why it is important we watch the decisions taken by MPC at their meetings on the MPR with the monetary policy rates, the cash reserve ratio, and the liquidity ratio. But let's look at those 3 ratios you want me to decompose. The cash reserve ratio is a proportion of a bank's deposits that are kept in the central bank to serve as reserve in the event that the bank requires liquidity support or the bank runs out of liquidity. So it's a reserve that the banks give, a proportion of the bank's total deposit that they keep with the central bank as a reserve. The value or the purpose of that cash reserve ratio, or how it influences the flow of capital money in the economy, is that when you have a higher reserve ratio, the bank's ability to lend will be reduced because take for instance, a bank has 100 naira as total deposits, and now the cash reserve ratio is 27.5%. It simply means that 27 naira 50 kobo of the bank's 100 naira 27 naira 50 kobo of the bank's total deposit will be kept with the central bank. So in effect, the bank has only left to lend just about 82.5 77.5 naira to lend. Sorry, 72.5 naira to lend. That's what the bank has. They have only 72.5 naira to lend. It also follows that of that, if they bring down the cash reserve ratio to something like 20 naira, the bank will now have 18 naira to lend. So the proportion of the percentage of the cash reserve ratio will determine what's left for the banks to lend to customers. The next one is the liquidity ratio. A bank is supposed to keep a certain percentage of the total deposits in liquid assets. Liquid assets means the cash in the vault, the balances, the current account balance they have with banks, with the central bank, the placement they have with other banks, and other investment in treasury bills that are maturing in less than 365 days. So all these things add up to the proportion of the bank's deposit that must be kept in this form so that at any point in time, when customers need to make withdrawals of their deposits, the central bank the commercial bank can pay the customers from these liquid assets. So currently that rate is 30%. It then means that if a bank has 100 million deposits, the bank will keep 30 million of those deposits in liquid form or near cash form, cash or near cash form, so that at any point in time they will meet the obligations they owe to their depositors.
If it's hold on, Mr. Chukwu, if it's not in cash, what is the near cash form? Is it, what will the near cash form will be?
Include investment in treasury bills,
okay,
placement with other banks, the balances they have in their current account with the central bank, then short-term maturing bonds, those bonds that are about to mature. These are, and then you did mention the vault cash, the cash they have in their till are also part of the liquid assets. So if the central bank or the Monetary Policy Committee comes up with a higher liquidity ratio, so that means the bank will keep a higher proportion of total deposits as liquid assets, and they will not be able to lend much. Then the last element of it is cash, the monetary policy rates. The monetary policy rate will determine the rate at which the banks can borrow from the central bank or can also lend to the central bank. The monetary policy rate, so banks will now set their own lending rate and their deposit rate against the monetary policy rate, such that if they run out of liquidity, they can go to the central bank and borrow at the monetary policy rate plus. Currently, we have an asymmetric corridor of 200 basis points and minus 500 basis points.
That's 2 to 5%.
The asymmetric corridor, the asymmetric corridor means that if a bank is going to deposit money with the central bank, it gets 5% less short of the monetary policy rate. So at 12.5% today, the bank, if any bank has any surplus money it wants to deposit with the central bank, it can only get 7.5%. 7.5%. That's what they can get. Similarly, that is why they say minus, asymmetric corridor or minus, or what they call standing lending rate of the central bank. Then you have the standing deposit rate. The standing deposit rate is the rate that the bank will get if they place money in the bank. Then what that means is that if a bank wants to borrow from the central bank today, they borrow at MPR plus 2%, or what they call 200 basis points. So a bank will borrow from the central bank at 14.5% today. So that will influence the rate at which the bank will also lend to its customers. So the monetary policy rate is important because it serves as the benchmark rate in determining the lending rate and the deposit rates in an economy. So those are the basis of these three major rates.
Thank you very much for Economics 101. I had to intentionally ask that question, because these are terminologies that we use all the time. So I needed my viewers to understand what we mean whenever we say those terminologies. Now the question is, it's a surprise move, isn't it? Were you surprised by that decision?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I was.
Good.
I was surprised that the central bank reduce the monetary policy rates.
And this is the first rate cut since March of 2019, if I'm not mistaken. One would say that what rationale did the MPC take, or what rationale did they derive that they had to bring down the MPR to 12.5%, bearing in mind that it's a rate that banks really do not follow? You understand what I mean? That how much sense will it make that you dropped the MPR, but the cash reserve ratio is left at 27.5%. And the banks need money now, especially as we're fighting a pandemic, as well as inflation rate is 12.34%. Mr. Chukwu, I know you're understanding what I'm saying, so I'm just putting everything together so you analyze everything for me because I'm looking at my time. So we have the inflation rate at over 12%, 12.34%, MPR at 12.5%, CIR at 27.5%. How much economic sense does it make right now?
Okay, Nancy, like rightly asked me that was I surprised? Yes, I was surprised because I felt that the objective of the central bank, which the central bank governor announced in his speech, is basically to stimulate economic activity in the second quarter of this year, in the third quarter of this year, because we know that global economy is going into contraction And every economy is trying to stimulate their own economic activity so as to reduce the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. So like the central bank governor said, they've already come up with a lot of intervention funding where they are granting development finance initiatives to support some sectors of the economy at subprime lending rates. They reduced their rate from 9% to 5%. They are granting 1-year moratorium on payment of intervention funds to those who access those funds. But I think what the central bank or the Monetary Policy Committee was trying to do is align the monetary policy rate to some of the other decisions they're taking on reducing interest rates to the critical sectors of the economy. But the challenge you have with that decision is that the most important factor that is constraining additional lending is the cash reserve ratio. And I'll put it in this context. Remember, like I mentioned earlier, the cash reserve ratio is 27.5%. And then you have a liquidity ratio of 30%. If you add those both, you have 57.5%. So in effect, the bank can only lend 100% less 57.5% of their total deposits. And if you have already compelled the banks to attain something like 65% of loan to deposit ratio, without additionally increasing liquidity or releasing their cash reserve ratio, the banks, irrespective of whatever level you bring down the monetary policy rate, will not have the liquidity to expand lending to the critical sectors of the economy. So if you really wanted to push for lending to the critical sector of the economy, you need to grant the banks an improved level of liquidity. And that could only have come from reducing their cash reserve ratio. So but that did not happen. So like you pointed out, there is already a disconnect between monetary policy rates and lending rates in the economy. And so this reduction will further heighten that disconnect, because without improved liquidity, the banks are not going to scramble to start looking for borrowing customers to lend. And that's why it was a surprise to me, and I know a lot of people have also expressed the same views, that the appropriate thing, if we really want to inject liquidity into the economy, would have been to drop the cash reserve ratio from current to 7.5%.
But the issue is, can the MPC really satisfy everybody? You know, because I remember, in fact, when we were passing through a recession, 2016, 2017, what was on the lips of everyone was like, drop interest rates, drop the NPR, drop the NPRs to stimulate the economy. In a recession, you need to, you know. Now they've done that. We're saying, okay, go to the CRR. Can the monetary authority really satisfy on all fronts, bearing in mind that they have the mandate of price stability, you know, FX stability? Stimulation of economic growth is perhaps a bit secondary.
Okay, and that's what I would say, is that the primary objective of the central bank is to maintain price stability. But in addition to that, you also have to support economic growth. And like the central bank governor has said time and time again, that he has to also go beyond that to support some sectors of the economy. But let's focus on the issue of price stability and supporting economic growth. What you have to look at is that managing monetary policies or managing the economy is a delicate balancing act. So at any point in time, you have to ask yourself, what should be the priority of the policymakers, or what should be our policy focus? You can actually say your focus now is to fight inflation. If you fight inflation, there is a negative side result from that, or unintended consequences of fighting inflation, which means you're going to apply the brakes, reduce liquidity in the country, in the economy, increase interest rates, and that will, the unintended consequence will be a slow down economic growth or economic recovery. At a period where the concern is that the economy is going to slow down on its own, so what you need to do is stimulate the economy. You have to be ready to live with a higher rate of inflation, because that will go with stimulated economy, injecting liquidity into the economy. So the question you ask yourself is that, what is the priority of the government at this point in time? Or what is the focus of the Monetary Policy Committee? Is it to drive economic growth, or to slow down rate of inflation and maintain exchange rate stability? That will define what policies they will take. But it's a delicate balancing act. But you should always err, or you should skew your policies towards the primary objective you want to drive.
Do you think that our own central bank also toed the line of other African central banks and other global central banks? For example, in Africa, the Egyptian central bank dropped rates by 300 basis points. We've also seen the Kenyan Central Bank, the Ghana Central Bank, dropping their interest rates, I think, to 8-year low. I think South Africa to Botswana, Malawi, some other central banks across Africa are also, you know, having lower liquidity requirements to encourage domestic lenders, especially this pandemic. So do you think that our own central bank, by way of our MPC, went that same path, so that they also counted?
Well, yes, it's the reality is that every central bank in the world will adopt some level of accommodative monetary policies. What we're only saying is that in our own peculiar situation, given the high cash reserve ratio, the Monetary Policy Committee should have also come up with not only a reduction in the monetary policy rate, but a reduction in the cash reserve ratio, so as to align that reduction to actual injection of liquidity in the economy. So that's the basic thing we are saying. We are not, expectedly, one would expect that all monetary policies globally, starting from the US government, the European Union, the Virtual Bank of England, everybody, including African central banks, will be driving to reduce the impact of corona pandemic on the economy by trying to stimulate lending, stimulate consumption, make for cheaper borrowing costs. But for you to achieve cheaper borrowing costs in India's peculiar situation, you must also free up liquidity that's currently stabilized with the central bank. And that's what we are arguing, that if you are willing to adopt some level of accommodative monetary policies, it should also go, you should go the whole hog and ensure that the banks have the liquidity to lend.
Okay. Let's take a look at this, because I know that our viewers would also be interested in that. I don't know if you saw the release yesterday by the Central Bank of Nigeria about revising timelines for failed transactions for those that use ATM and POS machines. What do you have to say about that? The timeline has been reduced to 24 hours. That's if you use your own bank card. If you use another bank card, you have a window of 72 hours. Yes. So what's your own view?
Well, I think it's quite appropriate. I saw that announcement by Isaac Okora, the Director of Communication in Central Bank, and I felt relieved, because the reality is that a lot of times people go to the ATMs and they get fair transactions and they won't get the amount reversed almost immediately. And some of those instances, people could get frustrated. You could have a transaction that you want to do, and that maybe you don't have more money beyond that in your account, and that transaction fails, and you have no money to do further transactions. So I think they should actually make it safer, because the truth is that this is the era of technology. The reconciliation can be automated, particularly on the bank's ATM, where the transaction is within a single banking system. There's no reason why it should take a whole day for that reversal to take place. For the another bank, then the key thing is to work with the switching companies to improve their settlement process, which the central bank alluded in that circular, in that they are also pushing for the switching companies to improve their settlement process and fast track that process, so that even when there are fair transactions, the fair transaction report is generated immediately, and a reversal process is triggered, and that you don't need to wait for a whole day for that reversal to take place. That will encourage people to move away from cash and patronize more of these online payment platforms, and reduce the risk of carrying cash that the central bank has been pushing for a cashless policy.
Okay. Final question, and I'll need you to answer that in just a few seconds. This same question I asked Abubakar Sulaiman, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of Sterling Bank PLC, on Friday during the AIT.live virtual town hall. The question is quite important, which is the deglobalization stories which we're seeing right now. How can Nigeria invest in all of these stories? Do you understand? What is Nigeria's path in the deglobalization story right now around the world? US, China is on one side, Brexit is also on one side, African Continental Free Trade Area is on one side. You know, our economy seems to be struggling. Where does it leave us in the equation, this global economic equation? Are we going to be there at all?
Well, Nancy, I think this has presented us with one of the best opportunities to actually build our economy, build a strong and viral economy. For me, the key thing, like you said, deglobalization is going to take place, and China will cease to be the manufacturing hub of the world. A lot of other countries are going to take that slack from China, because the world will no longer afford to have that level of concentration risk of one country determining what is produced globally. And for a country with a large population, with relatively young population, and the energies of our young men and their creativity, the country as a nation should support that. What do they need? They need supporting infrastructure, power supply, transport infrastructure, particularly power supply. If we get improvement in power supply, you're going to see a lot more companies come here to set up their manufacturing activities, because we have cheap labor that will complement that industrialization.
Okay, I think we'll leave it to that, Mr. Chukwu. Thank you very much for joining us this morning and sharing your perspectives. I wish you a great week.